let's jump into some fun stuff. Okay, I'm going to cover politics. Please do not hit me. Okay, I know it's a tough thing, but for many of us in our business, I will tell you that we have had to deal with some unbelievable, interesting historical events over the last 12 months. Between the election, hurricanes, North Korea, fires in California, now we're talking about pandemics out of Africa. I mean, we're getting into some really things that really have unnerved and rattled a lot of investors. So let's talk about this. By the way, this is one of the drawings in my book, and I love this cartoon here. This was the portrayal of the New Deal, the music, man, he's going to solve the world's problems and all this. It was, you know, the sarcasm of politics has gone on for a very long time. And remember, in the old days, politicians used to duel each other. So as we all know, if anybody's gone through the lecture hall here. So let's jump into this. So presidents and investments. So this was probably an article that many of you read, November 16th. I purposely did not put the publication, and I did not put the author of that piece, but needless to say, this author is probably a little embarrassed right now because he wrote at the bottom, when will the markets recover? Never. Okay? All right. I mean, it's too bad that we have to try to remove our emotions from money and not, it doesn't, we all have political views. I mean, my client base is literally a bell-shaped curve of people who are of all different thoughts, and ironically, when they all get together, they all do seem to get along okay, but at the end of the day, they don't see the world the same way. So anyway, let's go into this. So if you were curious about the winners of single-term and multiple terms, but listen to what I'm going to say here, this is commonly done. Many times when the media does this, they only talk about stocks. Here, I'm talking about stocks, housing, and bonds. So does anybody recognize this bearded guy? Anybody? Rutherford B. Hayes. Now, I'll tell you what, we probably could put a statue on Wall Street. He kind of looks like a lot of the people of the era there, and of course we know Ronald Reagan. So those were the two best single and multiple term presidents. But what gets interesting is when you jump ahead here, and I'm sorry again for the small writing. So if we were to look at this, so on top, Mr. Hayes, Mr. Coolidge, and Franklin Roosevelt all made best terms. And by the way, so you have both parties covered there. Then you have multiple terms, same thing, both parties are covered, Reagan, Clinton, Eisenhower. Then you get into single worst terms, well covered. And Franklin Roosevelt, because of the number of terms he had, his first term was unbelievable. The markets took off. We'll cover that in a bit. But don't forget, he also made the list of worst multiple term and also one of the worst single terms. And then poor George W. Bush was the only president who had 50% correction in the stock market under his two terms. So, but this is what I want to cover. These two arrows I have here and here. So these are all the Republicans and the Whigs, and here are all the Democrats. I want to pick on two presidents that in their era were considered disruptive, hostile. This man right here, he was accused of using racial comments in the White House. He threatened to beat up a reporter and made fun of his daughter singing. There were 2 articles of impeachment drafted in Congress, one when he fired Douglas MacArthur for running and getting into the Korean War. When he left office, his opinion polls were at 23%. If you remember, Dewey beats Truman. Harry Truman was not well liked by a lot of people in America at that point in time, yet if you tally it up, he was number 2 on as far as Democratic presidents go on stocks, bonds, and housing. Another president right here. He's one of the faces on Mount Rushmore. He was not supposed to be elected. He came in under the tragedy of an assassination, better known as Teddy Roosevelt. If you read what they said about Teddy Roosevelt back then, an inbred, insane person. He's going to kill us. He is invading Latin America. He's going to get us into a major war. Yet, investment-wise, he was a very good president. It's a tough thing to talk about right now because people are still very emotional with what's going on today. I'm just simply saying, try to remove your feelings about a president, the Congress, the Federal Reserve from your money. And it's hard to do. Mark and I had to talk a lot of people out from liquidating their portfolios November of last year. They're now thanking us. But the point being, We had bigger things to worry about, but people were allowing their feelings to drive what could have been a disastrous decision for them financially. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward. Okay, what you should worry about with the government is, it's actually in my book, I cut out these periods of time where you had this occur. The rising of interest rates and the rising of investment-related taxes. If you get those two things going and they go up too far too fast, it doesn't just hurt stocks, it hurts housing. So if you wanted to worry about something that's coming out of Washington or out of New York, that's what I would worry about. What's going on in that world? So if that's the one piece of, and by the way, both parties are guilty. I do find it funny, the poor presidents, can anybody here name who ran the Federal Reserve during the 1929 crash, or who was in charge of Congress? These folks typically get forgotten about, but we remember to blame Herbert Hoover, and we remember to give Franklin Roosevelt a lot of credit, but we never quite remember who else was in charge or in running those things. But we do have to pay attention to what's coming out of the Congress, out of the Federal Reserve, and certainly out of the White House. Anyway, so no one's too mad. Great. I'm glad to see you're all still staying here. It's interesting when you put it this way. Let's talk about wars. A lot of talk right now about North Korea. A lot of talk about what's going on with NATO and Russia and all these things. So isn't this amazing? I want you to look at this picture. This is Victory Day, World War I on this street. Wouldn't you love to go back in time one day? Look at that ticker tape parade. Yeah, I don't think we can do that anymore. I think there would be too many permits required, but what an amazing photo right here. Okay, so this is another typical headline that we're seeing right now. Does North Korea have nuclear threat? Oh my gosh, should we sell all our stocks and go into gold and bonds? Well, we have been in a very long military campaign, as we all know. In my book, by the way, in that book, we cover all wars back to the War of 1812. And I had to point out to somebody recently, it's actually kind of funny. They said, we had a war with Mexico? And I'm not talking about the Alamo. Yes, we had a war with Mexico. And then also, we came up on, the War of 1812, and we all know what the British did to Washington, but we typically forget that we did that to Toronto first. We burnt it to the ground before the British showed up. So history has a funny way of forgetting important facts. But anyway, this has been a very, very long war. We are war fatigued. And you know what? It's important that we show this, because a lot of you out there wonder why the young generation feels the way they do about money. I believe that the millennials have the same attitude. But here's the point. We wonder why there's a disconnect right now with younger people and our generations about money. Well, a lot of them had never seen a roaring bull market. Think of what a generation has seen in the millennials. They saw, again, 50% correction in the stock market, a war through pretty much their entire childhood going into their adult years. They have an attitude very similar to their grandparents and great-grandparents when it comes to money. They're very suspicious of stocks. They don't want to own homes because of what happened. They're fearful of loss. So there's an understanding why they're not real big about why are they not jumping in and saving money. And of course, we won't spend a lot of time talking about the student loan crisis. But there's a lot of thought of why they feel the way they do. And when you ask them those questions, it's interesting what comes out of it. But this has been a very long war. And also, as far as nuclear weapons go, the stock market went up for a very long time during the Cold War. Anybody here remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? What did the market do right after it ended? Took off. So you do get the initial panic, pullbacks, just sadly, just like 9/11, and then boom, markets take off. So should you liquidate your portfolio for fear of war? Unfortunately, war has been a rather positive stimulus for the stock markets, the real estate markets, the bond markets, and I feel bad saying that because we all know people that have been, who have suffered from war, but it's not a reason not to invest. By the way, any of you here remember the war rations? Remember these coupons? Anybody here from World War II? Any? Yeah, remember? Yeah, people think rations. Sure, food, tires, gasoline. Yeah, it's quite funny. I also think this quote at the bottom here, which was written in a magazine in 1943, really says it all. You got to keep a clear head. Try not to let the headlines about Nazi Germany or North Korea drive your decisions on economics.